instead of chairing.
It's much easier to be on.
Yeah, I think so. We leave all the chairing to Danny.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to the Literary Translation Centre at the London Book Fair. And congratulations to still being more or less upright at the end of day 3 of the London Book Fair. It may be that you're just the people who came for one day, but if anyone's been here for 3 days and still more or less awake and sitting without slumping too terribly in your chairs, you're doing better than the rest of us. It's lovely to see so many of you here today. My name is Daniel Hahn, and I've been asked to chair this conversation about grants and residencies and things of that kind. In other words, the kind of things that create the conditions for translation to happen. They create conditions for translators to be able to do their work, which may be money, there may be space and time, all those kind of things. We're going to be having a conversation with our 3 panelists about their own experiences, whether setting up, running, or actually taking advantage of some of the opportunities that exist. I think we're going to talk a little bit about maybe things that don't exist that we would like to exist. And we're, of course, going to leave plenty of time for you to join the conversation towards the end, which may be sharing information about grants or residencies you know about that you would like people to know about, or within reason, things that you think should be being provided by some institution somewhere that aren't being. And we can't promise that we will make any of those things happen, but it'll be really interesting to get a sense of the kinds of gaps there are in provision for translators who need support in order to do their translating. So brief introductions to the people I'm on stage with. To my immediate left is Kate Griffin, who, if you kind of disregard translators, Kate is probably the person in this country who's done the most to create the conditions for translation to happen. Whether at the British Council, at Arts Council England, at the British Centre for Literary Translation, or now at Writers' Centre Norwich, where she is Associate Programme Director. Something. It's one of those. It's a job title. She has one of those job titles at Writers' Centre Norwich, but she does the translation stuff. Is the thing you need to know. To Kate's left is Jamie Lee Searle, who is a translator from German, but was one of the founders of the Emerging Translators Network a few years ago, which, as many of you will know, is one of the things that's made the biggest difference to the translation profession in the last 6 or 7 years. At the far end of the stage is Tessa Lewis, who is an award-winning translator from French and from German, and who is also at this moment co-chair of the translation committee of PEN America. And I'm going to be talking to her about some of her own experiences as a translator, getting access to grants or residencies, but also the things that PEN offers, particularly the kind of grant, the kind of provision that there is in America from PEN and from other institutions. I'm going to start by asking Jamie if you could say something about the things you've benefited from, so residencies that you may have been on, how you've actually got access to these things.
So when I was an early career translator, I did mainly more kind of workshops like BCLT Summer School, the LCB in Berlin, those kind of things. The last few years I've started applying more for residencies, retreats, that kind of thing. And in the last 6 months I've done 2 residencies which were very different in nature. The first was in November of last year, which was at Writers Oh My in New York, so in Hudson Valley outside New York, and that's also known as Leydig House. That's the other name there, and that is they have a residency each year called Translation Lab, where they bring together 4 author-translator pairs working from different languages into English, and it's not just for US citizens, but British and other English language translators can apply as well. And it's a really incredible atmosphere because you're brought together in this very beautiful place, and you have the opportunity to work with the author of a project you're translating. And normally a lot of collaboration we do with the author would end up being questions sent by email. Perhaps if we're lucky enough to be able to be in the same place at the same time, we can meet up with them for coffee. But to have the opportunity to actually spend 10 days working intensively with the author, I mean, it varies greatly how long each pair decide to spend working per day. But with my author, it was really invaluable because she's an Austrian author. Her family emigrated from South Korea when she was a child. And this novel, she has set in Korea, and it's relating to the Korean War, the division of Korea. And as a translator from German language, that was a cultural sphere that I had very little familiarity with. So the fact that we were able to spend that time together and she could talk me through Korean culture, we were kind of sketching things and going for long walks and talking about things, and I really just got this insight that I wouldn't have been able to get by email. So that was really incredible, and also learning about the projects of the other pairs that were there as well. And it's a very, you have the freedom to work as you want to through the day, and then in the evening all the pairs come together and you have dinner together, which I think Tess will agree with me here. It's there's a cook there who's incredible, so you have this amazing dinner every night, which is wonderful.
Can you say something briefly about how we all want to go now? So about the application process, how one actually gets it. I mean, what's involved in actually applying and how difficult it is? Because I think
it's quite sought after. Yeah.
I would think.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds all right, obviously, if you like that kind of thing. But
I mean, I put a lot of work into the application. I was trying to think how many. Obviously I did it over a period of a couple of weeks, but I think I probably spent a few full days working on the application. I really wanted it to happen, and I think my tip would be that if you think very clearly about this or any other residency, what characteristic of that residency is going to benefit the particular project you're working on. So I really emphasised the fact that because this was dealing with Korean culture that I wasn't familiar with, that having the opportunity to spend that much time with the author would be very, very important for this project. So I really emphasised that. So it's very much tailoring every application you do to that particular, the nature of that residency. And for this one, I'm trying to remember, we had to do like an application letter, which was probably a couple of pages talking about the project, what stage you're at. You gave your own biography, the author's biography. We applied in, I think it was July last year. Yeah, the application deadline was July.
The current deadline is also July 15th this year. So there is plenty of time. I'm not sure if the form is open yet, but you can have time to think about it now and then put it all together by July 15th.
Mm-hmm. And they told us, I think, in August, and then the actual residency was in November. And the... Shall I talk about the other one, the Austrian? So the other one I've just got back from, was a 3-week residency in Vienna, which was from the Austrian Society of Literature. And that was very different in the sense that it was, you go there and they will give you a grant to cover the time you're there. So this is for if you're translating Austrian literature into English. So there's much more of a specific one, but a lot of languages, it's very much about getting online and researching, because there's so much more available than you might think. And often you need to track it down, because a lot of things aren't necessarily advertised that openly. And so this one, it wasn't in a group, there wasn't a place where you stay, they will give you the funding, and then you're essentially creating your own residency, but they will point you in the direction of relevant libraries, institutions that can help out with the research. So for this one, I was essentially taking the funds they gave me, using that to cover the travel, to rent accommodation for a few weeks, and then it was just me working by myself, just focusing. And because I'm at the editing stage of this book, that was what I needed, just to have that space and time. And so it's very much as well about thinking about what stage you're at with the project, what kind of residency will suit it. If you're at the stage where you're editing something and you need things to be very peaceful and quiet, then a communal residency where you're having dinner together with people every night might not be the right thing. So I would recommend that you not only think about the project you're doing, but also your own personal working style, what you know works for you, so that you'll be in the best environment possible to create the best work.
Thank you. It's worth, as you said, doing research and finding things that aren't terribly well advertised, but also thinking about ways in which things that do exist can be made available to you. And I mention this only because I'm in the middle of a residency at the moment in Paris for a month, and actually it's a writer's residency. It's not advertised as a translator's residency, it's advertised as a writer's residency, and turns out those of us who translate are writers, and the organisers don't seem to have a problem with that, which is just as well, because I really wanted to be in Paris for a month. But actually it's not something which you would necessarily find, it's not on a list of translation residencies, it's not something which is really being circulated among translation networks, but actually is open to us in the same way that it's open to writers of poets or writers of plays or writers of novels. Kate, would you say something about what's available in terms of residencies again, what is or may yet be available in terms of residencies and retreats here in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of residencies in other countries, and there's the Resi network of translation houses in Europe. There's Bant from Canada. We've heard about Ledig House. There have been fewer opportunities in the UK, but actually the first on my list, funnily enough, is the Avon Clock House, which is a writer's retreat. But when I asked, they said that they're also open to basically anyone who wants to spend 4 or 6 days writing. This is a self-funded one, so you can go online on their website, look at Clock House and book up and pay. The Free Word Centre and the British Library both have residencies, but translation residencies, but they've been more focused on organising events and focusing, promoting translation than on time to translate. The Charles Wallace India Trust offers residencies for Indian translators in Norwich and Aberystwyth, and has done for many years. And Literature Across Frontiers, which hosts the residency in Aberystwyth, they have an amazing Pinterest board with lots of translation residencies listed, and their website is a good a good starting point if you're looking for residencies. As Danny mentioned, I work for Writer Centre Norwich, soon to be a National Centre for Writing. And for the last few years, we've been working with international partners to offer residencies mostly to writers and sometimes to translators from Turkey, Korea, Japan, Indonesia and Bulgaria. Mostly the partners have been covering the cost of travel, accommodation and the stipend, and so we've tailored the residency according to what they've kind of requested. We had, for example, a month-long residency over the last couple of years for writers and translators from Japan. So we'd have 2 at a time, but last year we had a writer, Aoko Matsuda, and a translator, Polly Button, who has around, who wasn't actually, where is she? Hello. She wasn't actually there because she translates Aoko Matsuda's work, though she did end up translating some of Aoko's work. And the residency was meant to be about time to translate and research, though Polly used a lot of the time to actually branch out into podcasts about Japanese literature, which she did with our communications team, and are available on the Writer Centre website. So yeah, that was kind of quite an open-ended residency where, they came up with an idea of what they wanted to do in Norwich and then ended up doing something sort of slightly different. Again, we also had a shorter residency for a writer who was a translator, or a translator who's also a writer from Bulgaria. But because it was a short residency, there wasn't actually much time to write or translate. He spent most of his time networking, and particularly looking at the teaching of literary translation and creative writing up at UEA. You may know that by now that Dragon Hall, where we're based, has been closed for a while because we're building a new wing. When we reopen in the summer, we will have a little cottage that we can use for residencies. It's a small cottage, it's 2 bedrooms, but it'll be different because it's actually part of the Dragon Hall campus. So you'll kind of be next to our offices, and the writers and translators and residents will have access to a writers' colony there. So it's not, part of my role at the moment is to develop a year-round residency program, kind of focusing on how we best use that cottage. At the moment we're talking to different cultural institutes about, what they might do Some people want to send us writers for up to 3 months. I've also been talking to a lot of people here on the funding side, and one of the things that has come up a lot is the idea of, because it's 2 bedrooms, a writer-translator pairing, which I think would be great, to be able to offer residencies for, maybe a week at a time for people to come and work together. So
that's quite a lot of nodding when you say this, you notice.
I can see.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's something that I will be, looking into very closely over the next few months. We've got a residencies section on our website. It comes under support for writers at the moment. There's a drop-down menu with residencies at the bottom. But, this, as Danny says, translators are writers, and that's why it's there. Shall I talk about Cove
Would you mention
Park?
Cove Park? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I think part of the reason I was asked to talk about this was the Cove Park Translation Week that took place last October. Cove Park, for those of you who haven't come across it, is an international artists' residency place in Scotland. They've been running lots of residencies for years, and they've been offering residencies for writers, but I've been working with them for the last couple of years to integrate translation more into their programme. They had funding from Creative Scotland and Publishing Scotland to bring international translators working on Scottish books to Cove Park. But we wanted to do something for a broader range of translators, so we worked with them to offer this week-long retreat for translators. Basically, we offered accommodation and a contribution towards the cost of travel and subsistence. Sorry. Julian, the director of Cove Park, said to me that the ethos of Cove Park is basically one of benign neglect, which is something I really should have put in the information I sent to the translators before they came, because this is a very good description. The staff are there, they'll look after you, but they all go home at 5 o'clock, and you can basically do what you want. They're not going to ask any questions. But on the other hand, as far as I know.
You're engaged in espionage.
It was only a week, and we want, Cove Park is really difficult to get there. It's north of Glasgow in the countryside. It's in a beautiful park, and it's a lovely place to sit and work. So we didn't want to over-program the week. But on the other hand, it's not every day you have 12 translators from different languages together in one place to talk. So basically, people were free to do their own thing during the day, and then in the evening we came together for discussions, which were based on suggestions that people had put forward in their applications, conversations with Kari Dixon, who facilitated the week, and then we basically made it up as we went along and kind of did different things. We also had readings, informal readings to each other, first of all in the original language and then in the translations at the end of the week. So there was a little bit of sharing and talking about, issues that had come up. There was a lot of demand for this. I mean, you can only accommodate 12 people at a time in Cove Park, and we had at least 4 applications per place. So it was a really tricky process to select. One of the picking up on Jamie's points, one of the main things that we were thinking about in the application was the reasons that translators were giving for why they wanted a retreat, why now, why Cove Park, and also what they would bring to that week. So people who said they wanted to meet lots of publishers and network, that really wasn't going to happen. We did try to have a networking lunch, but if you've ever tried to get to Cove Park, you'll know that that's not a terribly good idea, so I don't think we'll have that next time. We ended up with a really interesting mix of languages and experience. It was mostly translators who were more emerging, but we had a couple of very experienced translators there as well to share. And it was great, and we really hope to be able to run it again later this year. So I'm still talking to Cove Park about how to do that. So yeah, watch this space.
Thank you. And if it happens, it'll be on your website, and so that's where people will find out. Tess, I want to move on to... Oh yes, of course. Tess, I want to move on to grants particularly, and just ask you... we'll talk about PEN in a moment and what's available from there, but can you say something about your own experience as a translator of securing funding for things? Right. And how, we know how hard it is, but you've had some success in actually getting grants yourself.
But first a comment with regard to Danny's description of the residency where he is. It's listed for authors, but they accept translators. There's a very good website that consolidates residencies of all types and all. You can search by country, by genre, by art form. It's called www.resartis, resartis.com, and they have, it takes some sifting because it covers all art forms, but they have things that you wouldn't necessarily think about, and I think it's worth always writing and asking, okay, you say a writer's residency, but do you take translators? Because more and more are doing so without advertising it, because it just hasn't occurred to them yet usually, so they're quite open-minded. So don't neglect something just because you don't think that it will accommodate translators. The worst you can get is a no. In terms of funding, it is very difficult. I mean, I have had luck with grants from French and German because those are among two of the literary languages that are best funded for translations, and that's why, at least in the United States, you see when 3%, the blog breaks it down, you have, let's say, 350 titles translated into English published in the United States. The leading language is usually French. Second is Spanish, and that's like 50 or 60 titles, and then German, and then there's a serious drop-off. Then it becomes single digits very quickly. But
even then there are distortions in funding, because even those single digits, a lot of them will be, you'll get a lot more from Catalan, from Dutch, from Norwegian than you'll get from really
Korean.
big languages in Asia.
Yeah. So as American citizens, you can apply for the NEA. I don't know how much longer that will last, but it has at least one more year in the budget. There's the Penheim Award, which you don't need a publisher. They favor emerging translators, and they favor languages or authors who are not known, but they do also give Penheim grants to established translators or established writers. Jamie just got one this year.
So it's UK citizens as well can apply for that one.
Everyone can, and you get $3,000. I mean, they've changed the rules since I got one. I think you get half of it up front, and then once you finish the project, you apply for the rest.
Yeah.
And that is important because not only do you get, a cushion to financial cushion to start translating, but they make a real effort to bring your work to the attention of publishers. So, and we're working right now on listing, on sort of tracking which Penheim grantees ended up getting publications, but so far anecdotal evidence looks like it's a quite impressive number. For the Germans, especially the Swiss, you can go to the Pro Helvetia website. They also will fund, give small grants to work up sample chapters. The French, it's through the Bureau du Livre, and it's very complicated. It takes a long time to do the French application, but it's worth it. One thing, as was mentioned before, by Jamie and Claire, it's important that you really take the time to do the application properly. And you may think, okay, I'm going to spend 2 days on this. Is it really worth it if odds of getting rejected are above 50%? And I would say it is, because I often find that it helps me clarify my thoughts about the book, so I'm better able to pitch it to publishers. They almost always require a description of the novel or how it fits into the landscape, and that again can be used either to pitch to publishers, or when the publishers inevitably come to you and expect you to do a lot of promotional work for free, you at least have that all set up. So carve out the time. It's useful on several levels, not just to apply for the grants.
Thank you. Jamie, would you say something briefly about your experience applying for the Penheim?
Sorry, did you say Jamie?
Yeah, Jamie, with the brand new Penheim grant you just received.
So I applied for it for a novella that I fell in love with about 3 years ago, and I had approached a number of publishers together with the German publisher, and a lot of people were interested, but because the book's very different and daring. They weren't quite sure, and was still carrying a torch for this book. I hadn't given up hope, but I'd been working on other projects, and then this year I just decided that this was the right time to apply for it, and I needed to produce I think it was between 30 to 40, roughly about 30-page sample from the book, part of which I'd already done anyway because I was pitching it to publishers, along with a statement of where it fits into the literary landscape, why it's so important, why I felt it should be brought to English readers, and then again the biography of the author and myself. And as Tess said, with these kind of things, you do put a lot of time into it, but the more often you do them, the more skilled you get at it. So over time, you kind of will be able to produce them quicker. I would say also with applications for both grants and residencies, I've often in the past reached out to a colleague or someone I know that's gotten a place or won that award before, and asked them if they would mind having a look over my application and see whether they think that it looks along the lines, because if you reach out to someone who's previously got it, there's a good chance that their perspective on it is going to be good. So I often get peers to have a read through it for me. And the application deadline for the Penheim, that was it was September, I think. Was it September?
They're redoing the schedule. So
Okay.
the deadline is not set yet, but the applications will open May 1st.
Okay.
Tentatively, May 1st. So I'm afraid you'll have to keep checking the website, but in May it will be the opening. And they're sort of scrunching it together this year. It will work itself out. So next year there'll be a longer application period, but starting May 1st.
Thank you.
And I was really delighted to find out I've got it, but also it's interesting that I've already had a couple of publishers that have written to me since the announcement, and asked for further information on the novella. So it feels like it's already creating something with that.
Great. So the Penheim is different from most grants in a couple of ways. One of them is, of course, the money goes direct to the translator. It's not something the publishers apply for. It's not for a published project. And of course, the other is that it's not limited to a specific language. And as Tess said, there are sort of distortions because there are some languages that are very well funded and some which are not so well funded. Kate, would you give us just a very quick rundown of the sorts of things that are available here in the UK, grant-wise?
Yeah. English Pen has 2 financial awards for publishers and translators. One is Pen Translates, which is for the publishers, and that's for the translation costs. And that, again, is open to works from all languages. And it can be for fiction, including children's literature, non-fiction, poetry, prose or plays, but not for magazines. This is from their website. You can find more details there. But their main criteria for assessment are literary quality, strength and innovation of the publishing project, and a contribution to the literary diversity in the UK. And I think as a scheme it has been very successful in really kind of widening the range of languages and literatures which have been translated. It's been very impressive. The other and it will support a project when the translation is in progress, because timing is always really tricky with these applications. The deadlines aren't always at the right time for your project, but it sounds like this is quite flexible. So the translation can be in progress, but not kind of nearly finished, basically.
But this includes things that publishers have not yet acquired rights to, which means that publishers can apply to a Pen Translates grant as a sort of, see whether they get grant support, and if they do, they'll then go ahead with the project. And it's very unusual for a publishing grant to be open to publishers that haven't necessarily got the rights already. Yeah,
that's really good. The other Pen program is actually for literary translators, Pen Presents. It recognises the role that translators play in bringing new works in, and so there's a round of awards each year, and each one focuses on a different part of the world. And it's basically you have to put in an application and a sample translation. You get £250 for the sample translation. Right. Is that right? Yep. On the English Pen website, there is quite a good list of other funders from national literature institutes, and there's also the Creative Europe Literary Translation Strand, which is, again, for publishers, but good to be aware of. The Arts Council England, has a new funding programme called Developing Your Creative Practice. And this is for individual artists, including translators, and it's a really nice fund because it is for time to translate. It's for research and development, building new networks and creating new work. The grants are between £2,000 and £10,000, and there are 4 rounds a year, and they open for applications today. 12th of April, deadline 16th of May.
Go, apply.
Yay.
No, not yet. Just wait.
Yeah, this is a really nice one because I think one of the problems that they'd had with grants for the arts for translators is that you're always looking at public benefit and that kind of thing. This is much more open-ended, and it's really giving artists time to work, including translators time to translate. So yes, check out their website.
Thank you very much. I wanted just to ask one more thing about residencies before I basically ask you for your wish list. Tess, when Jamie was talking about picking different kinds of residency, choosing what is the kind of thing you need, and they're individual ones or communal ones, I wonder whether you felt that in your experience, actually sometimes one of the things you get from a residency is precisely being not on your own. I mean, you have to be on your own enough to do the work, but actually being part of a community. And I ask this partly because the only other residency I've done myself was at Banff, which some of you all know about, which is in the most beautiful place I've ever been in my life. And you have 3 weeks with a kind of gang of translators, as Kate described for Cove Park. And obviously doing the translating is great and useful and the thing that pays the bills. But actually being in that kind of community, developing friendships that go on forever, having people to talk to who understand this weird thing that we do, that seemed to me actually a really valuable thing.
I've been to several kinds of residencies. The first thing about Banff is that you can apply for 3 weeks, but you can apply for your author to be brought over for one of those weeks. So it's another opportunity to work with your author. I haven't been to Banff myself, but I personally prefer the more communal type of residencies for translation. My favorite one for French and German is in Lorenhaus. It's outside of Zurich. You do not have to speak a Swiss or work in a Swiss language to apply. Anyone with a translation contract with a publishing house can apply. And what I like, it's beautiful. And what I like most about it is it's a very collegial atmosphere. And I have gotten recommendations for new projects, for new sources of funding, for residencies, for events. I met Ruth there, and Charlotte and others, and so there have been people there when I've been there where there's barely a common language, but it's really quite fascinating. You get a whole immediate support system. So I would really encourage you to look at Lorenhaus. It's LOOREN.net. The translation, the other extreme residency I did was in the last fall, at the Jan Michalski Foundation, which is outside of Geneva. And in that case, they built these little pods.
Oh, were you in one of the tree houses?
I was in one of the tree houses.
So jealous.
And it's also spectacularly beautiful. But instead of having, because it's the French part of Switzerland, instead of having a common meal in the evening, they have a common meal at lunch. French is definitely the lingua franca for that lunch. So unfortunately, some people who weren't comfortable in French didn't come. And then because it was this big lunch, many people didn't come to the kitchen for dinner. So it was much more isolated. That's good. That's good for a certain kind of work. There again, to apply, I believe the applications will open up soon, and the deadline is in July. They are encouraging translator-writer pairs. So if you can apply with one of your writers, you will have an advantage. You can also ask for a certain amount of time. I think it goes anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 months. maybe not with one author. And and they also pay your travel and give you a small subsidy. So it's really a luxurious but isolated experience for me. Not necessarily, not always. It always depends on the mix of people. But those were the two extremes.
It's
And
also it's worth googling that one also just to see what it looks like.
Yeah.
It's not just a beautiful setting, but I don't remember how many pods, but each of them is individually architect designed and kind of suspended from a thing at the top of an Alp, basically.
Yes.
Absolutely
It's
peculiar.
quite beautiful, and some of the pods were built by the architect to sort of show off, and they're not necessarily the most comfortable. But I'm afraid you don't have a say in which pod you get placed in. So I mean, for me, I'm freelance. I spend so much of my time at my desk alone translating. That's not necessarily the part of the experience I necessarily want to replicate. So the communal aspect for me is more important.
Thank you. Before we open to questions and comments, I'd like to ask the two translators for a wish list. I mean, Kate, I think, is not going to give us a wish list because Kate is going to listen diligently and make things magically happen. It's going to be fine. But Jamie, what are the things that don't exist, which are more or less feasible, you think, that should exist in this country or in the English-speaking world, at least?
I mean, I would say more residencies that are for the author-translator pair. I mean, I only started properly looking into applying for residencies in the last 6 months. So I found, and I've been living in South America for the last 4 years. So I've been very much kind of out of the kind of all the European organisations and everything that's been going on. So I just found there was a wealth of things available that at the moment I'm still, like the tree I had written here, like tree houses, ! Because when I found that online, I just thought that looked incredible. So that would be my thing, that I would say that more that are arranged for the authors and translators to go together. And I think it somehow needs to be done in a way, because the advantage for the translator is clear. The author, obviously, by that point, will be working on another project, probably, and so it needs to be done in such a way that the author has time to work on their own projects as well, I think, because otherwise they're, taking a couple of weeks or so out of their time to, go back over something they were working on quite a long time ago. So there needs to be kind of a balance between what the translator needs and what the author needs to make it beneficial to both of them. So that would be what. Excellent.
Tess, do you have a wish list?
What I would like to see more of is something that happens a little bit at Ledig House during these, and somewhat at Lauren as well. When you have the translators and authors together, they will bring in editors and they'll bring in rarely, but they will sometimes bring in critics. And I really wish there were a forum that would bring together publishers, critics, booksellers, and translators, because there are so many holes in that network. Translated literature gets reviewed sometimes very well, sometimes very badly, but if there were some reliable way to get more information around the various works in progress or works that have already been published and draw both the booksellers and the critics in, we could, I think, have better outreach and better readership formation.
Thank you. She's writing them down. You see, it's going to be great. We have a little under 20 minutes. I wanted to open it up for you now. So if anyone has either things that you think should be being done within reason, or things that you are aware of happening, experiences you've had that you would like to share, because actually it would be really good to get a sense of other opportunities that we haven't talked about, whether it's grants, residencies, or indeed other things that would make it easier. That was very quick. Thank you. Can we just get a microphone there?
Hi, my name is Tuesday Bambry. I was very lucky to go on a 10-day residency with my mentor, Antonia Lloyd-Jones, at the Vertella House in Amsterdam. That was amazing. Please make that happen here in this country too.
Hello. I wonder if there's also space somehow for a combined writer-translator residency, where the writer produces site-specific work and the translator translates it on site, and then perhaps do an event at the end about the writing and the translation process. That one's for Kate to write down.
Yes. So it's a writer-translator residency, but it's not on old work. It's actually something which is happening in real time, sort of thing. There's someone in the front here, and then we'll come over to you.
I'd just like to reiterate how useful I would find it as a translator to do what you said, to bring together the whole gamut from translator, author, publisher, commissioning editor, because we spend our time at the book fair running from our language publishers to the British publishers who might be interested to find that the right person isn't there, and give them cards to some with a job title that we've never heard of. And it would be really quite useful to know how the whole scheme works from beginning to end, and that sort of networking I think would be very, very useful indeed.
Thank you very much. There was someone here in the second row.
Hi, thank you. I was wondering, as a person who writes in Hebrew, I was wondering if there are any collaborations, like the ones you talked about, with different countries, with Israel as well, like translating from Hebrew to English. And if not, maybe there should be.
I'm sure there are, but it would be good to check that Res Artist site, because you can search by Israel. But of course, you would be you would have the opportunity at Ledig House or at Banff to work with either your author or other translators from Hebrew. I mean, sometimes it's what I do is, if I know that I have a certain window at one of the translation houses, I will reach out to translators in my language pair that I know, so that you have an opportunity, when you do get together at dinner, at lunch, or over coffee, to say, I've got this certain problem that I'm wrestling with, and so you get immediate sort of a support system, not just morale, but also tricky knots in your text. So you could organize a mini residency yourself. And actually, it's I was speaking at some point during the fair with someone or on a panel, and someone was talking about how if you're, sort of not in one of the major metropolitan, or, not in, say, Berlin or New York or London, how do you find people that you can exchange with for translation? There is a monthly workshop in New York that's very open, and anyone can come and read from their work in progress, and it's less formal than a workshop, but you can come and bring a problem that you have, and start one yourself. Even if it's 2 or 3 people, you'll be surprised at how quickly the words spread. And sometimes, even though you're translating from Hebrew and you have this problem, people can offer solutions without knowing the exact source language. So sort of do it yourself. Yeah.
There's a lot of benefit, I think, to working in groups that have mixed languages, which have a common target language. So there are also, as Tess said, there are residencies that are specific, that are not specific to language, which are open to everyone, things like BAMF, of course. There are going to be some programs, whether it's residencies or not, that are language specific. We have had mentorships specifically for Hebrew in the past. But the other thing is, it's worth finding other people who translate from Hebrew and getting little bits of intelligence they may have, because with most language translation communities, there's quite a nice network of people who, one of them will know about this thing that's starting up, or someone will have been on something before. So even things that are not very easy to find because they're not on Res Artists yet or whatever, if you know Jess Cohen, or if you know someone who works with the language, they will also have useful tips of things they've discovered themselves. It's worth sharing this information within the language as well as across the profession.
Oh, one more idea I have. There's ALTA, which is the American Literary Translators Association, has a conference every year where it's a 3-day extravaganza of different panels, much like here today, but always 3 or 4 going on at the same time. And you can apply for a subsidy to go there as an emerging translator. So they will, give you a couple $1,000s to cover your flight. That application might still be open if you're interested in going. Mm-hmm. It's in the end of October this year in Bloomington, Indiana.
Thank you. Yes, Catherine, and then we'll go over to Paul over there.
I just wanted to do a quick plug for the Society of Authors. I think some of you here are probably members of the Translators Association, which is the translators group of the Society of Authors, and we have co-programmed the programme which you've been enjoying for the last 3 days. But people do forget that we do offer a range of grants and awards for writers in progress, and authors includes all sorts of writers, which includes translators. And I think translators sometimes forget that where it says writer, that includes you too. So we do offer grants for writers in progress. Some of them are genre specific, some of them are age specific, some of them are quite old sort of grants and charities which have quite sort of esoteric criteria, but it's worth having a look on our website because you may find that you may fit. So that's societyofauthors.org/awards. I also particularly wanted to mention that we ran a pilot last year, a small grant programme with some outside support, actually specifically targeted at supporting people's needs for accommodation. That could be anything. That could be going to a conference, it could be a working trip, it could also be a residency. It was a relatively small amount of money, only around £300, but of the applications that we received, by far the best were actually from literary translators who know how to use residencies. And I just wanted to flag that up because I think that's probably quite typical. There are lots of small pots, small charities, small trusts hidden around somewhere that just needs a bit of delving. But if you are a Society of Authors member, or even if you're not, I would recommend having a look on the website because you might find that there's a pot out there and that might well help you.
Thank you very much. There was a question from Paul on the aisle just here.
Yeah, I work for the European Commission, so the European Union, and Kate mentioned the Creative Europe grants that are available. Just to say, so that's the European Union's funding stream to help creative projects, including literary translation. Those grants are available to publishers, not directly to translators. But this year's call for proposals is currently open until the 23rd of May. So if you have something that you want to translate, you can find a publisher that might be interested in adding your potential translation to their project of translations. I think they have to submit, I think it's between 3 and 10 translation projects, books, for support for the funding. Then perhaps if you can find a publisher that doesn't know about these things and you can make them aware of it, they'll look kindly on you. And with a view to the future, Creative Europe is open not just to, or it includes not just European Union countries. There are non-European Union member states that are part of Creative Europe. Whether the UK will remain part of Creative Europe after 29th of March next year, who knows? But if it does, presumably that funding stream will still be available in future years as well. If anybody's had any experience of interacting with publishers on that particular funding stream, I'd be interested to hear from you as well, what your experiences were with it. Thanks.
Thanks. Thank
Sorry,
you.
yes. So the website. Yeah, if you go, there's a particular agency that promotes the scheme here. It's called the Creative Europe Desk UK. So Creative Europe Desk UK. They've got lots of information and help, and there's a secretariat of people there to give information about those grants. I don't know the name of the website exactly, but if you Google Creative Europe Desk UK, you'll get to it.
Thank you very much. Next question or comment or... Yes, here in the second row. Just wait for the mic, please.
Just a quick question / comment on languages that are perhaps underfunded, to Tessa's comment earlier. With regard particularly to the emerging translators mentoring scheme, obviously not all languages are available every year. How do you choose the languages that will be represented? Is it a matter of who you have on hand? Is it a matter of who funds it? Different kind of like cultural councils from around the world? How does it work?
It's complicated. Yeah, I mean, obviously funding comes into it, but we also try to be flexible, and I think we've offered non-language specific mentorships as well to be more open. And we also, when there are languages that we would really like to include in the scheme, because, you know, there's kind of a buzz around the literature but very few translators, and where there isn't funding available, then we'll kind of try and look for other ways of supporting that. But if you have, you know, suggestions for languages that you would like to see included, it's always worth getting in touch just to let us know. You know, it is also kind of in conversation at events like London Book Fair, where we talk to people and get ideas about which languages people feel really should be included in future years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have a language in mind?
Oh, yes.
Italian?
Italian. Okay.
Yes. Italian. We have done some, but not enough. We have had Italian mentorships in the past. Howard Curtis was our Italian mentor in the past. Next question. Ruth here, right in the front row.
I know a lot of these residencies are only open to people who have a book contract already. But are there things that are available for emerging translators, for people who maybe have a little bit of experience but don't have a contract yet?
From a residency point of view, that's difficult, isn't it?
I mean, like I said, the BCLT summer school, it's a similar, I mean, in some ways it's similar because you are working together with the author. So then, you know, as a group of translators working from a particular language, we'll be with the author for a week working intensively together. And that is very much for kind of early career translators. But in terms of residencies...
No, and I think it's one of the reasons why, from the grant point of view, the new grant from the Arts Council is a really interesting one that Kate mentioned, because so much of the way grants are bestowed and residency used are focused on absolute certainty of there being an outcome that we can, you know, disseminate to readers or to publishers or whatever. For reasons you understand, because if you're going to support something, you might as well support someone who's going to be read rather than someone who's just doing it for their own entertainment. And it's one of the reasons why I think the Arts Council Fund, because it's open to people who are starting out as well as, or more or less starting out as well as people who are quite experienced, and you don't have to say, I can demonstrate that I'm going to have impact on 1,473 people, which you can then measure and use in that sort of taking the public thing or the impact thing out of the equation means that it suddenly becomes open to people who either don't have a contract because they're starting out, more or less, or don't have a contract because they're doing something a little bit more experimental, a little bit more risky, a little bit less obviously commercial. But there are, I mean, for residencies as well, there are, for reasons I understand, there are often imperatives to make sure the money is being spent on things that are going to reach readers, basically.
I suppose there's nothing to stop a group of emerging translators renting a holiday cottage somewhere and just doing it themselves.
The person you're sitting next to has just been organising one of those. There's a group of us, so Jamie just mentioned summer school BCLT, and the group who were doing the multilingual prose summer school course 2 years ago have done that, have gathered various parts of the world a few times since, and we're all spending a long weekend in Scotland in a house with a pool at the beginning of September. None of you are invited. I just want to make that absolutely clear. You will not be welcome, but it is possible to do, and if there are enough people, you can afford a house with a pool, as it turns out. And the point is, people will be coming with their own thing. It's not going to be like at summer school where everyone's working on thing. People will come with their own work and look at each other's work and read bits aloud, and so it's sort of like the model we had at the Arvon Foundation, sort of like the model we have doing multilingual things at summer school. And this is kind of what Tess was saying, that you could set up yourself if you haven't got, if the opportunity doesn't exist. The point is we're going to be sitting around with bits of work and helping each other along. We're quite excited. One more, do we have time? One more quick question. Last one? Anyone? Was there someone else? No? Change your mind. No? Okay. If anyone's changed their mind, they can come and ask a question privately afterwards. Ruth, do you want to say something quickly?
I came in late, of course. I just wondered if anyone mentioned the French Voices grant, which is one of the few grants for French only, sorry about everybody else, where the translator can apply for funding without having a contract. And the way the grant works is if you're awarded a grant, you get $6,000 which gets given to the publisher, and then the publisher is supposed to give $2,000 to you, but you've only got 12 months from the time that the grant is awarded to find an American publisher who will publish your work, otherwise it goes back into the pot. And that's through the book office in New York, but it's only for publication in the US, not in England.
Right, there's actually two. There's the Hemingway grant, and then there's the French Voices, and I can't remember which is which, but
the French Voices is
it's contemporary.
It's contemporary, but translators can apply, whereas the Hemingway grant is for publishers.
And it's for books published before 2009 or after. I mean, there's a date cutoff, but look carefully, because you can, if you do have a publisher, you can convince them to take. You have a better chance of convincing them to take on their work if they can apply for these grants, but that's true. For example, Roz Schwartz won a French Voices award for one of her latest books, translation as Transhumans, and it was kind of tight. She did manage to find a publisher, but it was quite close to the end. Yeah, so it's a little bit stressful, that one, but it is definitely worth trying. Yeah. Especially if you have its money, and especially
it's money available to translators rather than to publishers, which is unusual.
And I believe the deadline is in the fall.
I think there are 2 rounds every year.
Okay.
And I believe Ruth got 2 in the last round. So if there's any money left after they've given it all to Ruth, you might be able to apply for it. We are, I'm afraid, out of time. Kate, by the way, there's a leaflet.
I just wanted to wave this leaflet around in case you haven't seen it already. It's on the table of the Writer Centre at the back of this room. Opportunities for literary translators. It covers the mentorships, the International Summer School that we co-program with BCLT, and Residencies. And I'm hoping that next year we'll have a leaflet with even more opportunities on the back.
Great. Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking our panelists. Enjoy what's after the fair.